Greetings! Today's video is once again not a book review. It feels a bit like November has been the month of no book reviews, but I have actually read quite a bit. So the goal here is to sum up the reading month of November and talk a little bit about DINOvember, which was the reading goal. I realised in thinking about this video that I have now read for 2 months in a row book challenges. October was spooky season. November has been DINOvember. Thank you to Andrea from Infinite Text and Brian from Bad Taste Books for implementing it. That's it for me. I'm not book challenging for a while. I'm going to graze my to read shelves as I wish. However, it was fun. I had full intention of wearing a good lizard shirt, and we know now that dinosaurs are not lizards. However, I was going to wear a lizard shirt. It's too hot. It's summer. We're waiting for a storm. We're melting here. Couldn't do it. So instead, I just wore my ammonite. Ammonoidea, of course, is a group of extinct coiled-shelled cephalopods that left these absolutely gorgeous shells in the fossil record. Okay, so what did DINOvember hold for us? According to my reading list, I probably started it off with The Clocks by Agatha Christie, a thoroughly non-dinosaur related book that was probably meant to counteract the strong levels of spooky season reading that came through from November. I enjoyed it, and I'm pretty sure I reviewed that one. The next one that I have reviewed on my channel, and the first one for DINOvember, at least I think I'm getting the order right here, is An Age by Brian Aldiss. This one was published as Cryptozoic, I think, in America. And despite that wonderful little Tyrannosaurus Rex hatching fully grown out of an egg, it's got a certain dearth of dinosaurs within this book. However, it was a fun book. It was very Brian Aldiss. Thoroughly worth reading. I do recommend. Look at that. Look at that Tyrannosaurus Rex. Tyrannosaurus Rex is worth it, even if nothing else about it was particularly dinosaurian. Okay, in non-dinosaur and non-science fiction related news, I read An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is not the first Ishiguro book that I have read. This is the first one that completely and utterly wowed me. I was really impressed by this book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I fully intend to read more by this author now. I might even go back and read the ones that I've read. Never Let Me Go, I believe I read last year, and I liked it, but I didn't think it was fantastic. So I may have to revisit Ishiguro. Okay, after Ishiguro and An Age, I delved straight into the ones that I had namely aimed for: Anne McCaffrey's Dinosaur Planet and Survivor's Dinosaur Planet 2. The covers are spectacularly dinosaurian, and the planet, as described, was also exceptionally dinosaurian. Sadly, the books were not as dinosaur as they could have been. I have reviewed both of them, I think separately. If you decide to read them, bear in mind that these are not Anne McCaffrey's best. I love Anne McCaffrey as an author, but even I have to admit that based on these 2 books, if this was my first encounter with McCaffrey, there would probably not have been a second encounter. They were frustrating on a number of levels. They are now available in an omnibus, which is how they should be read, and is kind of how I read them, because number 1 doesn't actually have an end to the story. Number 2 kind of does, and yeah, they're not standalone books. They're okay. I don't regret reading them. I think in the case of one of them, it was a reread from ages ago. I don't remember it too well. There we go. Okay, needing a break from the less well-written of classic science fiction fantasy, I reread The Enormous Egg by Oliver Butterworth. a fantastic book which first interested me in Triceratops as a kid. This book sadly has had way too much reading occurring and is no longer connected to itself. The illustrations in here by Louis Darling are fantastic. And it's actually a very good story. It's a good story to bring a kid who likes reading historical fiction. Actually, it's not historical fiction. It was written in the 40s. It reads like it was written in the 40s. If you've got a kid who can read that sort of a book, this is a really, really fun story about a boy and his dinosaur. And it's full of references to overly authoritarian government, which was apparently one of Butterworth's characteristics, and it makes it very readable to an adult as well, in my opinion. Okay, before I do that, I then reviewed Birthday Letters by Ted Hughes. This is a completely undinosaur relevant book of poetry by the man who was the poet laureate in England until his death in 2008. This is poems reflecting on his life with Sylvia Plath, to whom he was married until her death. And the poems in this book span the period before he actually knew her, getting together with her. They got married when they'd only known each other for 4 months, discovering her depression, living with her and her depression, and then the aftermath after she was dead, and reflecting upon that. It's controversial among strong Sylvia Plath fans, I believe, but despite that, I think it's well worth reading. And I think it's worth noting that Ted Hughes didn't write about Plath very much during her lifetime, so this feels to me very much like a person responding to the death of a loved one. It is dedicated to Frida and Nicholas, their 2 children, and on my copy this beautiful cover was actually painted by Frida, who is now living in West Australia and is an artist. Moving on to The Dinosaur Heresies by Robert Bakker. I did actually finish this in November, and it was a mission. This is a huge book. It could cover as home defense. There's a lot to talk about in this review, and I will talk about it. I will publish it a bit later, but I did actually start and finish it in November. It was a near thing. I finished it with barely a day to spare. And now I have 2 books for Jake from Pulp Mortem. He likes reviewing books that do not have a wide acquaintanceship. The Smallest Dinosaur in the World by Michael Salmon has no good read reviews at all. Here's one for you, Jake. And My First Book of Dinosaurs and Other Prehistoric Animals is got only 1 Goodreads review. Very rare. So my idea with these books, the first Flying Reptiles, was to have them as background, and when DINOvember was over, to pop them into one of the little free libraries that we've got around the Gold Coast, or possibly the community library in Tweed. I am now doubting this concept because while they are kind of fun in many regards, especially the Smallest Dinosaur in the World, which is not in any way pretending to be realistic, it's just pretending to be fun. And the author, Michael Salmon, wrote a lot of kids' books, and they are excellent in their own right. My First Book of Dinosaurs, however, is basically perpetrating all of the orthodoxies that are completely destroyed in The Dinosaur Heresies by Robert Bakker. Things like they are reptiles, the first flying reptiles, as it said. No, they weren't. Flying lizard to first bird. They weren't lizards, they weren't reptiles. And arguably Archaeopteryx, which this is meant to be, was not in fact the first bird per se and as such, but rather a dinosaur with some features that may not have been accurate. And here we have the horned faces. About 80 million years ago, herds of 4-footed dinosaurs roamed slowly across the plains. They had wide bony collars around their monstrous heads. They were armed with long faces. They were the ceratops, or horn faces. I believe the name has changed since then. And as Bakker has pointed out, there was nothing about them roaming slowly. They were fast, and they didn't have legs shaped like this, like reptiles. They had straight front legs that allowed them to move with the same sort of speed that a charging rhinoceros can, and indeed apparently their joints were very similar to rhinoceroses. Maybe they're rhinoceroses. And there is also the longest and the largest. Some of the plant-eating dinosaurs grew to a truly enormous size. Much of their lives were spent in lakes where the water helped support their weight. That was lies to children that I too as a child was taught, and I got vehemently told off for saying that doesn't make any sense. Those long stick-like legs would sink right into mud. And that is what Bakker proves rather nicely in Dinosaur Heresies. There is a theme in this video, isn't there? I did enjoy Heresies very much. So I'm left with a bit of a conundrum. I don't personally need these books in my collection. However, do I give this to a little free library where I'm basically perpetrating lies to children by giving them a book that tells them all these things about dinosaurs that are no longer true? Do we need to do that to small children? Probably not. Maybe the smallest dinosaur in the world can go to a little small library. Don't know what to do with my first book of dinosaurs. Do you want my first book of dinosaurs? I'm sure you don't, but what on earth else am I to do with it? The illustrations are actually very pretty. It's just the minimalistic amount of information that we get here is largely incorrect, deceptive, and could make kids quite unhappy. Elasmosaurus. Great images. Maybe I should just rip them out and wallpaper my house. Who knows? Anyway, so much about my first book of dinosaurs. What I didn't get to was The Great Time Machine Hoax by Keith Laumer. This a definite dinosaurian type book. I had planned on it. I seem to never get around to Keith Laumer. I've got a couple of his books and I keep wanting to read them and it never quite happens. Anyway, that's the one from DINOvember that I didn't get to. And now, over here, we have the most unusual book that I plan to read for DINOvember is A Night in Caverland by Peter Stack. So A Night in Caverland by Peter Stack is a rare children's book, which you may find mentioned online. The only places, and it's disintegrating. So though it's been in my family for a while, I don't read it often. And though I started it in November, I can't carry that around with me. I read it very carefully in one location only. So I'm not very far in. I'm only 3 or 4 chapters and going slowly, as I said. Now, the cover design is by Unk White, about whom I know nothing. And the internal illustrations are by Roderick Shaw. If you try to Google this one online, you will find a whole heap of not very much. A catalogue search of the National Library of Australia will show you this. The illustrations by Roderick Shaw, as acknowledged. They believe it was published in 1940, but there's a question mark about that. The publishing house that published it is the College Press, 38 Carrington Street in Sydney. And when you search the College Press, it doesn't come up with a whole lot, nothing much that I could find. It does come up with a link to some history about Australian first settlers, the Smythe family, but I couldn't really figure out what the connection was meant to be. As a rare book, it does have an online presence in rare bookshops, available to buy online for $35 each. I am quite certain that those $35 books don't have pieces falling off them. They may not have been scribbled all over by the family who owned them, and possibly their back cover is actually, and page, are still attached. like I said, this one's been in my family for a while. And it's deceptive because on this cover, it looks a bit like a brontosaurus, which is why I was going to do A Night in Cavernland for DINOvember. But reading it, it's a long time since I read it. It's a long time since I last found it, actually. It was in a box, a storage box. Reading it, I discovered and remembered that that animal on the cover is not actually a brontosaurus or a dinosaur of any sort. It's a bunyip. Now, you may have heard of bunyips if you're Australian. You probably haven't if you're not. A bunyip is an animal sharing phylogeny with the drop bear, possibly Bigfoot, and the abominable snowman. It is an animal whose origins are entirely in the overheated brains of people telling stories to scare people with. So this bunyip is called Bunno, and he becomes friends to Molly. It's actually a really pretty good story for the 1940s. The 1940s children's literature tended to suffer from the Edwardian and Victorian ideal of children being these really sweet, sugar and spice and all things that are nice for girls, and something and slugs and snails and puppy dogs' tails for boys, which makes them sound really cutesy. There's nothing really cutesy about children, in my opinion. They are as variable and as individualistic as adult humans. But Victorians and Edwardians had this sweet, cutesy attitude toward them. So a lot of the literature follows it. And this book doesn't entirely depart from that. Peter Stack has created a main protagonist who's very not assertive in a way. Her name's Molly, and she finds her way into Cavernland under a deserted quarry. She's leaving Grandma's place to go home, but she diverts by this quarry because she really wants to see if the wagtails have laid their eggs. She falls into the quarry. She can't get out. A talking bird meets her and directs her to going under a boulder, which leads her down into fairyland. The line drawings are quite beautiful. I actually think the ones in The Enormous Egg are better, but these would probably make better paintings if you could see the originals that were larger. So here's Molly. She's fallen down into the underworld. It's full of stalactites and stalagmites and fairies. The fairies take her to their leader, and their leader has found a crossword puzzle that has fallen down from the world above. They want to know the name of farmer in Latin. And Molly, her schooling isn't as good as it should have been. She hasn't been paying enough attention to lessons, so you've got that moralistic thing happening. She can't remember the name for farmer. It's on the tip of her tongue. So the rulers put her in this dark cave all on her own to remember. Only some of the fairies take pity on her. They and Bunno, the bunyip, go down to keep her company at night. And then they decide to go even deeper into the deeper and more dangerous caverns. And here is Bunno, the not dinosaur bunyip, being captured by the inhabitants. And that's as far as I've got. So here is the non-dinosaur book that I am still reading after starting it in DINOvember. It's actually not been a bad reading month. I have enjoyed everything that I read. I liked the themed reading. Not doing that again in December. In December, I'm going to read whatever I like, and I will review them as I read them. And I hope you get to watch them, because some of them will certainly be good books. And in the meantime, while I'm reading them, you should also be reading good books. Thank you for watching very much, and have a great December.